Wait a minute. Not on yet. Working now? So good evening, everyone. Are any of you here for the first time? You too? Hi, nice to meet you. And so what we are doing, this is a class that's been going on for a number of weeks or months. Yeah, I think about 2 months now. And so I'm explaining Buddhism. The title of the course is called Discovering Buddhism. So it's kind of introductory information about Buddhism. And so we usually start with some meditation, about 15, 20 minutes of meditation. Have you done meditation before? Yeah? Okay. So we usually do meditation on the breath. But if you have learned some other kind of meditation and wish to do that, as long as it's silent, as long as it's not making noise, then you feel free to do your own kind of practice, your own meditation. So the meditation is basically a way to just settle down, because probably many of you have been busy during the day, and this might be the first time you're really sitting down and having a quiet time all day. So just to calm down, quiet down, and just get some more experience of a meditative state of mind. Okay, so we'll meditate for about 15, 20 minutes, and then I'll do the slideshow. We'll have a break about 8 o'clock. We usually have a 15, 20-minute break. Then carry on with the slideshow and end with some question and answer or discussion. And if there's time, we'll do some meditation on what I've been talking about tonight. We'll see how that goes. So let's start by getting ourselves settled in a good position for meditation. So whether you're sitting on the floor or sitting in a chair, try to sit with your back straight, because that helps the mind to be more clear and focused, concentrated. But it's also important for the body to be relaxed. That means not tight or tense. So even though you sit up straight, let your shoulders relax. And in fact, try to let all the muscles in your body relax. Let go of any tension you may have anywhere in your body. One way to let go of tension is to take a few deep breaths. So breathe in slowly, deeply, as much as you can before it becomes uncomfortable. Pause for a moment and then let the breath go out slowly. You can let it go out through your mouth. And as you're breathing out, you can imagine if there is any tension in your body or in your mind, it goes out with the breath. And then it disappears in space, leaving your body more light and relaxed. So do that for 3 breaths, breathing in slowly, deeply, and then breathing out slowly, breathing out any tension in your body or mind. And then just resume your normal rate of breathing. So just allow your body to breathe as it normally does without trying to control or regulate your breathing. And then with your mind, your awareness, be aware of the breath coming in and going out. And then keep bringing the mind back to the breath when it wanders away, which it probably will, because it's just the habit of the mind to be busy and jump from one thought to another, past, future, other places, and so forth. So it's very hard to stop that type of mental activity. So it will continue to happen. Don't be surprised or upset about that. But when your mind does wander away from the breath to some other object, like a thought or a sound or a memory or whatever, as soon as you realize that has happened, gently disengage your mind from that other object and bring it back to the breath. And don't worry if you have to do this again and again. It's part of the practice of meditation. So we just need to be patient with ourselves. It doesn't help to get upset and impatient. So just try to stay patient and calm and have an attitude of kindness, friendliness towards yourself and towards whatever arises in your experience, whatever kind of thought comes up in your experience. Try not to judge anything. Say, oh, that's bad. I shouldn't think that way. So each thought, each experience in our mind is temporary, transitory. It's a bit like a cloud going through the sky. It's not something permanent. So our mind is like the sky. It's vast and clear and spacious. And thoughts and memories and other experiences just pass through the mind, the way clouds pass through the sky. So just notice the thoughts and other experiences coming and going. Let them go. Just keep coming back to the breath again and again. So, one of the effects or results of practicing meditation is that we get a better look at our mind. We see more clearly what's going on in our mind, what kind of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on we have. And we may sometimes be a little disturbed by what we see in our mind. Things we wish were not there. Things we feel embarrassed about or even shocked about. And that's why it's so important to try to have this attitude of loving kindness, friendliness, and non-judgmentalness. It's not easy to be that way sometimes. But that's the ideal, the thing that we try to work towards. Try to meet whatever comes up in our mind, whatever kind of thought or feeling or emotion or whatever is there in our mind, to try to meet it with friendliness. Not saying, oh, this is bad, this is terrible, wanting it to go away, wanting it to disappear, because that doesn't help. Rejecting it, denying it, hating it doesn't help. It just makes things worse. So it's important to learn to have this attitude of friendliness and acceptance. And one thing that helps with that is to remember the Buddha's teaching on impermanence. It's not just a teaching of the Buddha, it's a reality, it's a fact. It's a fact of life that everything is impermanent. And so, these thoughts, even the most horrible thoughts that might come up in our mind, they're impermanent. They don't last. They're not always there. They just come and they go. They pass through like clouds. Just like with clouds, sometimes clouds are beautiful and white and fluffy and they look like little lambs dancing across the sky. But some of the clouds are pretty awful looking, black and scary and threatening and not so nice to look at. But they're all basically the same. They're just clouds. They're temporary. They come and go in the sky. They're not permanent. They're not always there. And so it's the same with the contents of our mind, the thoughts and emotions and whatever that comes and goes in our mind. They just come and go. They're just transitory, temporary, and not permanent. And of course, sometimes we might wonder, why is that there? I don't want that to be there. I don't want that kind of thought in my mind. According to Buddhism, our mind has been around a long time. It didn't just start existing when our body did. This may be hard to believe, but this is the Buddhist view. So our mind existed long before our body came into existence, before our life began. It's been around a long time, and it's had many, many lifetimes. And in our past lives, we've had lots of different kinds of experiences. We've done all kinds of things, good and bad. And the mind carries imprints, like imprints or seeds from our past experience into this life. So when we're born, our mind is already kind of full of imprints from the past, from past lives. And sometimes those imprints can come up, ripen, and cause us to have experiences. So the Buddhist explanation is that's the source of the thoughts and other experiences that we have in our mind. Of course, experiences of this life will also have an effect. Things that happen to us from the time we're born, in our childhood, with our family, with our friends, in our neighborhood, at school. And so, of course, experiences in this lifetime will also have an effect on our mind and can be the cause for different kinds of thoughts and experiences. But in addition to that, there's also the stuff from the past, from past lives. Many people have memories of past lives, and so for them, it's not a question. It's not something they have doubt about. They remember. But you don't have to believe it. Buddha said you don't have to believe everything I said. Just check it out for yourself and see if it's true or not. But anyway, I'm just saying that's the Buddhist explanation where some of our thoughts, some of the stuff that comes up in our mind could be because of past lives. And I don't know, for me that's really helpful because, I can have some really awful things coming up in my mind and I think, well, where did that come from? That's not something related to this life. So to me it just makes sense that brought from past lives. And that helps. And also Buddhism says we can clean up our mind. We can work on our mind and gradually reduce the kind of unpleasant, negative, painful aspects of the mind, and we can build up, increase, cultivate the positive aspects of the mind more and more and more and more. So the mind can be changed. And that's the whole purpose of meditation in Buddhism, is how to change the mind, transform the mind. But we have to see it first. We have to see what's there. We have to know what's going on in our mind to be able to then work with it and change it. Anyway, so I have some slides for tonight's talk. Okay. I wonder if it would be better to turn those lights off. If that's okay. Okay, so Discovering Buddhism, this is the name of the course that we're doing. And we're on module 3, which is called Presenting the Path. So this is just a sort of overview of the Buddhist path. And we started this module last week. And last week we just looked at a little bit about the Buddha's life and his attainment of enlightenment, what it means to be enlightened, and how, according to Buddhism, everybody has the ability, the potential to be enlightened. And then we looked at his first teaching on the Four Noble Truths. Does anyone remember what the Four Noble Truths are? Or at least one of them? What are the Four Noble Truths?
Well, suffering and the cause of suffering, and the way to be free from suffering, and the first one, I guess, is the missing one of them.
Yeah, so the first is suffering and the causes of suffering. And then the third one is the cessation of suffering. That's like freedom, being free from suffering. Then the fourth is the path that leads to that state of freedom from suffering. Okay, so we just went through those kind of briefly last week. And then tonight I'm going to focus on the fourth truth, which is the path. And when the Buddha gave his first teaching, the way he explained the path was in terms of these eight steps. It's called the Noble Eightfold Path, meaning it's kind of like 8 steps. 8 steps to enlightenment, to liberation, to nirvana. And actually there are different ways of explaining the path. This is one way, and we will also look at other ways next week and so on. But this way has 8 steps, so we're going to look at that tonight. But first, I thought it might be interesting just to look at this term path, because it comes up a lot in Buddhism. Path? What's a path? So our normal understanding of path is like in the woods, right? You go out in the woods and you have a path that you walk on to go through the woods. So in the context of Buddhism, what do we mean by a path? It's not like a physical thing. So in Buddhist philosophy, it's explained that a path is actually a mind, a state of mind. And not just any state of mind, but a high, advanced state of mind. It's a realization. Okay, so that's the actual meaning of a path. When they talk about path in Buddhism, it's a mental state, something that arises in the mind, and it doesn't just arise by itself without any causes and conditions, but it arises as a result of doing practice, doing meditation. And there are many paths, not just one, but many different paths, meaning many different realizations, which are like steps on the way to nirvana or enlightenment. So attaining nirvana, attaining enlightenment involves gaining these different realizations, which are called paths. So it's a bit like steps, taking steps along on a journey to nirvana or enlightenment. And the initial path, the very first path that one attains is called the uncontrived realization of the determination to be free. That's a lot of words there. Or renunciation. So I'll just explain what that means. You've probably heard of renunciation. That term comes up in Buddhist texts. Renunciation it's a realization. It's a state of mind, and it comes about as a result of thinking about it, meditating on the situation that we are in, as we are unenlightened beings. We are not enlightened beings. I mean, I am not. Maybe some of you are, I don't know. But those of us who are not enlightened beings, who haven't reached Buddhahood, who haven't reached nirvana, we are in a situation which is, in Buddhism, it's called samsara, or we sometimes translate that as cyclic existence. So that's the term given to unenlightened existence, being unenlightened. And this situation of samsara involves a lot of problems, suffering, First Noble Truth, a lot of suffering, a lot of problems. There's sickness, we get old, we die, we get into problems with other people, people mistreat us, cheat us, lie to us, abuse us. And then all the terrible things that happen in the world, war and famine and corruption and destroying the environment. So all of these things, there's many, many problems as long as we're in samsara. So one needs to contemplate this situation and see it as suffering, as unsatisfactory, as problematic, and then develop the wish to become free, to get out of this situation. So that's the meaning of renunciation. Renunciation means I want to get out. I want to get out of this situation. It's a bit like if you were thrown into a prison. Let's say you were arrested, and maybe they got the wrong person. A crime was committed, and they thought you were the one who did it. Okay, so they come and arrest you and put you in prison. So all of us naturally would feel, no, I don't belong here. I don't want to be here. I want to get out. No way we would feel comfortable and happy and want to settle down in the prison. Our mind would just be thinking, I have to get out of here. This is wrong. I don't want to be here. So that's a bit like the feeling of renunciation. It's that state of mind of seeing this situation I'm in is really terrible, and I don't want to stay here. I want to get out. I want to get free. That's the meaning of renunciation, determination to be free. And it comes about as a result of meditating on the first two truths, basically, suffering and the cause of suffering. And then this term uncontrived, in the middle of that sentence, what that means is after meditating on this again and again and again, your mind becomes so familiar with it that it just arises naturally, spontaneously, automatically. You don't have to try to feel that way. It's just, again, like that feeling of somebody who's been locked in jail, um, unfairly, wrongly. Nobody has to tell them, you have to wish to get out of here. That just naturally, spontaneously, the wish to get out will arise in their mind. So that's the meaning of uncontrived. It's just a natural and spontaneous experience arising in the mind. So when a person achieves that realization, that's the first of the paths. Okay, so it's a pretty high level of mind, pretty high level of realization. And then from there on, there are other paths that one achieves. So I don't know if this is interesting for you, but I'm just explaining this term path. Okay, so now we're going to look at path in general, the path to enlightenment, the path to nirvana. And so, as I mentioned, I said we're going to look at the Eightfold Path. But before we go to the Eightfold Path, I just want to explain these three things, because the three trainings, this is another way of explaining the path. It's a little simpler because it only has 3 points instead of 8. So I'm just going to mention these three, and then we're going to go through the 8. And then at the end, I'll explain how the 3 and the 8 fit together. So the 8 actually fit into the 3. But because the 3 is a little simpler, then I thought it might be helpful to look at that first. Okay, so the 3 trainings. The first is called ethics or morality. Morality. I prefer the word ethics, but some people like morality. So this has to do with our behavior, how we behave. And ethics, I mean, we find ethics in all religions and also even in society. We talk about ethical behavior. Even if people are not religious, they still have to behave ethically. Now, in Buddhism, ethics is based on compassion. Compassion meaning that we understand that other people and other beings don't want to suffer. They don't want to suffer, just as we don't want to suffer. And with that understanding, you decide, I don't want to make others suffer. I don't want to do anything that causes suffering to others. So that's a attitude. That understanding is the basis of ethics in Buddhism. It means, so ethics in Buddhism means living your life in such a way that you try your best not to cause suffering to others. You try not to hurt anybody, basically. Yeah, that's kind of the bottom line. Not hurting others, and then trying to help them. Not just not hurting them, but on top of that, trying to help them, trying to bring them more peace and happiness. And then the second of the 3 is concentration. Sometimes it's called meditative stabilization. So this is when we develop our ability to stay focused or concentrated on an object like the breath or any other object, and train our mind so that it's not just jumping all over the place here and there, but it stays, continuously for longer and longer periods of time on that one object. This is not easy. You probably know, you probably experienced, it's not easy to do. It does require a lot of effort and training and practice, but the Buddha did explain how to do it, and there are people working on it very seriously and attaining it, attaining very strong concentration. And concentration is not an end in itself. Some people may think that, oh yeah, if I can just get concentration, then that's it, everything will be fine. But it's not an end in itself. It's more like a tool. When you develop good concentration, then you need to use that ability to work on the third training, which is wisdom. So wisdom is actually the most important of the 3. Wisdom means understanding the the way things are, understanding the reality, the true nature of things. Because according to Buddhism, our basic problem is ignorance. We don't understand how things are. We see things in a mistaken way, just like a person who's taken hallucinogenic drugs is hallucinating, seeing things that aren't there. So we're kind of like that. We are always seeing things in a wrong way. And that's our basic problem. We don't see reality. We don't see the true nature of things. And so wisdom is the opposite of that. Wisdom is when we wake up and see things as they are. And that is the thing that will enable us to be free of suffering. Because once we have this wisdom, then we clear away ignorance. We clear away all the other disturbing emotions like greed and hatred and jealousy and pride and selfishness and so on. So all of those just get cleared out of the mind. And this is the real way to achieve nirvana or liberation or enlightenment, is by wisdom. However, it's not easy to gain wisdom. You have to have a very concentrated state of mind. So that's why the number 2 is important. We need to have the ability to stay focused, concentrated, to develop wisdom. And it's also not easy to develop concentration. So to be able to develop that, we need the first uh, training, which is ethics. We need to behave ourselves. If our behavior is completely wild and out of control and we just do whatever pops up in our mind without thinking about the consequences, then when we sit down and try to meditate, it's going to be very hard. You may have tried that, if you go all night party, just doing it, being really wild, and then in the morning you sit down and try to meditate. Probably not so easy. So the way we live our life, the way we behave and so on, will have an effect on our ability to meditate and develop concentration, and that in turn will enable us to develop wisdom. So there's a kind of step-by-step process, although we can be doing all 3 at the same time. We can be working on ethics and concentration and wisdom, but you can't just skip over the first 2 and go to number 3. It's not going to work. And you can't skip over number 1 and just do 2 and 3. So we really need all 3 if we want to get out of suffering and attain nirvana and enlightenment. Okay, so I'm just introducing these, and I'll come back to them at the end and show how the Eightfold Path fits into these 3 in a nice way. So now we'll start going through the Eightfold Path. I won't finish before the break, but I'll at least get started. So this is the 8, just in one list. Right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation or concentration. Now, the word right here, we shouldn't think that this, like in Buddhism, the Buddha just laid down these rules that we're supposed to follow. And he said, this is right and this is wrong. You should do this and you shouldn't do that. And we're supposed to just follow that without question. So it's not like that in Buddhism. Even though the Buddha did mention things like, for example, killing. He said, killing is a bad thing to do. But still, as a Buddhist, the Buddha himself said we're supposed to think about what he taught, not just blindly believe, like, having blind faith, but we're supposed to investigate what the Buddha taught and think about it for ourselves and decide for ourselves if we think it's true or not. So if the Buddha said killing is wrong, killing is harmful, then we're supposed to think about that. Well, is that true or not? And hopefully, after thinking about it, we will come to the conclusion that, yeah, actually, it's not a good thing to do. It makes the other person suffer, and it also doesn't feel right to me. And also the family, the person, the victim's family and friends, they're going to be unhappy too. So it just seems to cause a lot of suffering and problems. So I think the Buddha is right about that. So that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to use our own wisdom and, investigate. And then if we do that and we come to the same conclusion that the Buddha did, then then we would, practice what he taught. So the Buddha gave teachings and advice, but it's up to us to investigate and see if they're true or not. And basically, what the Buddha was concerned about is the elimination of suffering, reducing and eliminating suffering, and producing and increasing happiness. So basically, that's what Buddha and his teachings are all about. So we have to check, okay, does this bring suffering or happiness? And we might come to the same conclusion that the Buddha did. It's a little bit like with food, for example. Certain types of food are good for us. If we eat them, it nourishes our body and our health. We'll be healthy, we'll feel good, we'll have energy, and so on. Other kinds of things that we eat might be bad for us, like poisonous mushrooms, for example. I like mushrooms because, I mean, the example of mushrooms, because, there's some mushrooms that are really healthy and delicious and good for us. And then there's other mushrooms that are poisonous and make us sick and maybe even cause death. Okay, so we want to make sure that we eat the right kinds of mushrooms and avoid the wrong ones. Okay, we want to eat the ones that are good for us, bring good results, and avoid the ones that are bad for us and bring bad results. So it's similar with this list of 8 things. So according to the Buddha, certain types of speech and action and so forth are good for us. They're healthy. They'll bring good results. They'll bring happiness and peace and so on. And then other things, other types of actions and behavior and so on are bad for us. They'll make us suffer. So that's the meaning of right and wrong here. Right means these are conducive for happiness and peace for ourselves, for others, for the world. But we have to check this for ourselves and see if we agree, see if we think it's true. Okay, so the first that Buddha mentioned is called right understanding, also sometimes called right view. And this means correct understanding of what is right and wrong. What's true and false, what's beneficial and what's harmful. And understanding things like the Four Noble Truths. And there are 2 levels of right understanding. One is knowledge that comes about through learning, listening to talks, reading books, studying, and so forth. So that becomes like intellectual knowledge, ideas. But then the second level is realization. And that's when the understanding that we have really becomes part of us. It becomes integrated into our mind and our being so thoroughly that it's more than just knowledge. We are living it. We are experiencing it. So that's the ideal, is to get to that point where it's not just in our head, ideas in our head, but it actually becomes part of us, part of our life. So traditionally in Buddhism, for example, Buddhist monks and nuns spend quite a bit of their time studying. In fact, in the Tibetan tradition, in Tibetan monasteries, at least in the Gelugpa tradition, monks and nuns spend 20 or more years studying. And the way they study is pretty amazing. They actually memorize texts, huge texts. They memorize them they know them by heart. And then they get teachings on them, and then they discuss, debate, meditate on them. So they really get a very thorough knowledge. And I don't know, there may be some people who think, in Buddhism, we shouldn't study, we shouldn't read books, we should only meditate. And so according to my teachers, this kind of idea is not correct. And in fact, they have a saying in Tibetan. They say if you try to meditate without study, it's like going rock climbing without arms. Has anyone ever done rock climbing or mountain climbing? But I think we can try to imagine somebody who doesn't have arms trying to go rock climbing. Very, very hard. Impossible, I think. So similarly, if we don't study, if we don't learn about the path, for example, where we want to go and how we have to get there, if we don't do that and we just sit down and meditate, there's not much chance that we're going to reach the goal, the destination, at least in the Buddhist context. The goal is enlightenment, nirvana, liberation. So without knowing about that goal and how to get there, then just meditating, very unlikely that we would get there. It's also a bit like if you want to go to some place. Maybe you want to go to Paris, for example, but you you just set out walking down the street or driving in your car, and you don't even bother to look at Google Maps or whatever GPS or maps to know where you're going, how to get there. So you could be end up in the wrong place, going in the wrong direction, and so on. So anyway, study, learning and study is important. So that's what's involved in right understanding. One has to have the right understanding of what we're doing, why we're doing it, where we're going, how we get there, and so on. And then right thought. So basically, right thought means trying to generate positive thoughts in our mind, which include loving kindness, compassion, patience, and so on. There's many different positive thoughts, positive states of mind. And secondly, trying to avoid negative thoughts, which include anger, greed, hatred, selfishness, jealousy, and so forth. So this is part of Buddhist study. We learn about the mind. We learn about what kind of thoughts or emotions are positive and bring more peace and happiness, which ones are negative and just bring more disturbance and trouble and unhappiness. And again, this is something we need to investigate for ourselves, not just believe what the Buddha said, but check which types of thoughts are conducive for happiness and which ones are conducive for suffering. And so I found this quotation, which is quite nice. Maintain positive thoughts because thoughts become your words, words become your behavior, behavior becomes habit, habits become your values, and values become your destiny. So there's a cause and effect sequence there. What we think, what happens in our thoughts, seeps down into our behavior, speech, actions, lifestyle, and so forth. And then these become habits, and in this way we are creating our own future. The kind of things that we experience in the future depend on what we're doing now, starting with our thoughts. Now, realistically, right thought is hard to do. It's very hard to practice. Later, we're going to look at speech and action, which are kind of more easy to start with. So it's not easy to change our thoughts, but we can slowly, gradually. And then again, meditation. Meditation is a way to do that, a way to look at our mind and then start to work on what's going on in our mind. There's a nice story from the Native American tradition. You may have heard this, but it's nice about the mind. There's an old man talking to his grandson, and saying that in every person there are two wolves and they're fighting with each other. So one wolf is all of our kind of negative thoughts, anger, selfishness, greed, pride, and so forth. And the other wolf is all of our positive thoughts, love, compassion, selflessness, and generosity, and so forth. So these two wolves are inside of us, and they're fighting with each other. And the little boy said, "Oh, so which one wins?" And the grandfather says, "The one that I feed." So we have a choice. It's not always easy, but we do have a choice about which kinds of thoughts we feed, we nourish, we cultivate, we give energy to. So those are the ones that are going to become stronger and more habitual. Okay, so maybe we can just stop here and have a break, and then I'll finish after the break, and hopefully we have some time to do a little meditation on these. So if you're new here, upstairs we have, what do we have tonight, Martin? Coffee? Coffee, herbal tea, biscuits. Yeah, if you're hungry. So we'll have a break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll start again. Then number 3 is right speech. So this has to do with our speech. Basically, it involves using speech that is honest, positive, and helpful. And the Buddha mentioned 4 kinds of speech that are wrong speech, that are harmful. So we try to refrain from those. One is telling lies, lying. That's pretty universal. Creates lots of problems. And also, I think if we just check how we feel when we do say things that are untrue or that are harmful, I think deep inside we have a feeling that this isn't right. It isn't right to speak that way. So just by going by our own intuition, our own conscience, we have the word conscience, we have this sense of knowing inside what's right and wrong, what's helpful and not helpful. And then there's also another kind of speech called divisive speech. Sometimes this is called slander, but I think divisive speech is more descriptive, because this is speech when, like, we speak in a way that causes 2 people who are friends to become enemies, right? Or they may already be enemies, and we make it worse. We make them even worse enemies. So it could be between 2 people, but it could also be groups of people, even countries. For example, there's certain groups of people, like Israelis and Palestinians, for example, or there's people in Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis. Yeah. So they're like 2 ethnic groups that have this very long-term rivalry or conflict. And people will sometimes speak in such a way that makes them hate each other even more, and even incite them to violence, like what happened in the war in Rwanda. I don't know how many people, 1 million people or something, were just killed just because of this ethnic conflict and hatred of each other. So divisive speech is speech that produces this kind of problem, whether it's between 2 individuals or 2 groups of people. So it can really create terrible suffering, terrible problems. And then harsh speech would be when we're speaking like directly to somebody and saying words that hurt them. You blah, 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 these hurtful words, insulting words, critical words. I've also heard it can include nasty words like 4-letter words, because people get offended. Some people do anyway. When they hear such words, they feel shocked. So it's best to try to avoid that kind of speech. And the 4th one is called idle talk. Sometimes it's called gossip, but I think the word idle talk is more what's the word? Includes more things. Gossip usually just refers to talking about people, who's going out with so-and-so and who just broke up and who's having an affair and what the queen is doing and what the princess is doing and this and that. So those kind of stories. But idle talk can also include more than just that. It can include talking about football, talking about fashion, talking about TV and movies. So you're probably thinking, oh, God, I do that all the time. But the main problem with this kind of speech is that it's often done out of attachment or desire or aversion, hatred. So there's often a attitude behind it, which is unhelpful, unskillful. And it can also increase that kind of attitude. You're talking about things you have attachment for. Food, for example. We sit around talking about food. We're probably going to end up with more attachment, more desire, more craving for food. So that's why this type of talk is considered wrong speech or unwholesome speech or unhelpful speech. It's because of the effect it has on our mind and also on other people's minds. Another reason is that we can spend a lot of time doing this kind of thing. And if we look at how our time is limited, we're not going to be around forever. So we have a limited amount of time. And there are things we could do with our time that are more helpful, more constructive, more beneficial, more wholesome, helping us get closer to enlightenment rather than creating more suffering. So this is why this type of speech is recommended to avoid. But it depends on motivation. Because, for example, if you go and visit your family or your friends, and this is what they like to do. out of friendliness, or out of kindness and compassion, to engage in this kind of speech, because you can't expect them to be interested in you giving a talk about Buddhism or meditation or more meaningful things. So they would just get bored and maybe angry at you even. So in that kind of situation, just out of kindness, compassion, friendliness, wanting to get along with other people, and engaging in this kind of talk, it's okay, as long as you don't do it too much. Does that make sense? I hope I'm not sounding like, sometimes people say, if we eliminate these 4 kinds of speech from our speech, there's not much left to talk about. But, I have great admiration for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I think he's, a wonderful person. And I think he shows that, being an ethical person, living ethically, doesn't mean your life is without fun. He obviously has a lot of fun. I've seen photos and also conferences with, like, Desmond Tutu. They seem to be great friends, and they joke with each other and tease each other and have a lot of fun. So I think that shows that keeping to right speech doesn't mean we can't have fun, doesn't mean we have to be serious all the time. So a lot of it has to do with our motivation. Why are we saying the words that we say? And if our motivation is kindness and love and concern and caring for others and wanting to benefit others, then as long as we don't say hurtful words or untrue words, I think that's because speech is very, very powerful. One word, if it's a negative word, or if it's said with a negative motivation, it can have devastating effects. And also one positive word, or one word that is spoken with a positive motivation, loving kindness or wisdom, can can also be very powerful. Can lift somebody out of their suffering, out of their misery. So mainly it's just to point out how speech is important, and it's good to be mindful of our speech and try to make sure the words that we speak are helpful and not harmful. But the Eightfold Path, they're things we can't expect to do right away. It's more like we work on, we try, we train, we practice, and gradually over time, we can do it more and more and better and better. Next one is right action. So this has to do with bodily actions, things we do with our body. So it basically means we're acting in ways that are non-harmful, try to avoid harming others, and are considerate of others. So having consideration for others and how they don't want to suffer, they want to be happy, and so on. And the Buddha mentioned 3 kinds of actions, wrong actions, we should try to avoid. Killing is one. That's said to be the worst thing we could do to anybody or any being, because everybody values their life. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to be killed. Even animals, even insects. So we try our best on the Buddhist path. We try to avoid killing, and then the counterpart to that is to try to preserve life or save life if we can. So sometimes there are situations where we might have an opportunity to do that. There's a person or an animal that's in danger, being run over by a car or drowning in the water or whatever. If we have an opportunity to save their life, that's a great act of kindness. So, so each of these has, a negative side and a positive side. So the negative side is killing, and then the positive side is saving lives when we can. Stealing, I think that's not too difficult to understand how that causes suffering, because people value their possessions, and if they're taken away, they suffer. And we suffered too, because we know it's not right. We know it's the wrong thing to do. So stealing can be done in different ways. One is actually taking something, but it can also include not paying when you're supposed to. You go on the bus or the train and don't pay, or you try to sneak into a movie theater without paying, then that's also kind of stealing, because the money is owed and we're not paying it. So again, there's a positive side of this, which is to give. To if we have resources, we have enough, and somebody else is in need, doesn't have enough, then sharing what we have with them is the opposite of stealing. So that's creating some good karma, good energy by giving. And then the third is sometimes it's called sexual misconduct, or we could also say unwise sexual behavior. So this would include things like rape, child abuse, adultery, cheating on your partner or spouse, or causing someone else to do that. Like maybe you don't have a partner or a spouse, but somebody else does, and you get involved with that person. So this causes suffering, because if the person who's being cheated on finds out, which they usually do eventually, then they're very unhappy, very hurt and angry, and so on. So it creates a lot of suffering. So we try to avoid that type of behavior. And again, the opposite would be behavior, sexual behavior that is loving, that is kind, compassionate, considerate of others, not using others for one's own wishes and needs and so forth, but really done in a loving way. Okay, so then we try to avoid these three types of behavior, and any other. I mean, the Buddha pointed out these, but any other kind of, like, doesn't mention torture here, but I think it's pretty understandable that that would not be a good thing to do. Or beating somebody up. Maybe you don't kill them, but you cause them a lot of suffering. So we just have to use our wisdom to understand what types of actions cause suffering and try to avoid those, and then try to do actions that are helpful and bring happiness to other people and other beings. Okay, right livelihood, number 5. So livelihood means what we do to support ourselves, how we make a living. And the point here is we should try to avoid livelihood that causes suffering. So the Buddha mentioned 5 things: dealing in weapons, producing them, selling them. I think that's pretty understandable. Because weapons can be used. They're not always used to harm others, but they can be. So it's better to avoid that. Animals for slaughter. So Buddhism values all living beings, including animals. So if you raise animals, even if you're not the one who kills them, but if you raise them and then you sell them to somebody who does kill them, then that's also not an ideal livelihood. Slavery. It seems that this still exists in some countries in Africa. And also prostitution is often like slavery. Young girls sold and forced into prostitution, and they're pretty much like slaves. So this still goes on. And also in India, I think there's still some forms of, they call it indentured servitude. You know, anybody, they might be, because of a debt that they owe, they're put into a situation where they're like slaves. And anyway, I think that's understandable. We should avoid that kind of livelihood. Now, intoxicants, this is a tricky one. Um, this includes drugs, but also alcohol. So producing it, selling it, because again, this can lead to suffering. When people become intoxicated, they can lose control of what they're doing, and especially if they drive a car, this can lead to accidents, it can lead to death, and it does do so. There's a lot of people who are killed as a result of this kind of drunk driving or driving under the influence of intoxication. So because of the suffering it can cause, and also alcoholism and drug addiction, you know, that harms the person who's addicted, but also their family, their friends. It's really a lot of suffering involved in abuse of substances like that. So it's better to avoid that kind of livelihood. And then poisons. So producing, selling poisons, because they can also be used to create suffering. So these are the things that Buddha mentioned, but I think we can also use our common sense and come up with other ways of making a livelihood that might lead to suffering and problems. And so ideally we try to avoid those and try to find a way of supporting ourselves that doesn't cause harm and even is beneficial. For example, taking care of people who are sick, physically ill, mentally ill, doing social work, and so forth. Is that clear? Okay, then right effort. This means, basically it just means putting effort into things that are beneficial and not harmful. But the Buddha mentioned 4 specific things, and this mainly has to do with the mind. Preventing the arisal of delusions that haven't arisen. So that means watching your mind and trying not to allow your mind to get caught up in delusions like anger, greed, and so forth, because they are the cause of suffering. So try to stop those from arising. But then if they do arise, working on them, subduing them. There's lots of methods in Buddhism on how to work with delusions, disturbing states of mind, and transform the mind so that instead of being angry, for example, one can have love, compassion, patience, or at least a neutral state of mind. So it's possible to transform the mind and make it free from the delusion. And then cultivate positive states of mind which haven't yet arisen, like wisdom. If we don't have wisdom yet, then we try to develop wisdom. And then maintain positive states of mind once they arise. So when there are positive states of mind, try to nourish, cultivate, so that they stay longer and longer and become more and more habitual. So it's mainly through the practice of meditation that we are able to do this. And again, this is for our own benefit and also for the benefit of others. It's good for us, good for others. And then the long-term goal is becoming enlightened. So it's hard to find a picture to illustrate this, but I thought this is a nice one. Because the idea is we don't only work on our mind in meditation, but we try to, whatever positive states of mind we're able to develop in meditation, we try to bring them into our life. And, all through our day, as much as we can. It's not easy, but try to always be in a positive state of mind and do positive things, be attentive to others and their needs, and then try to help them when we can. So I thought this was a very touching picture. Some people might not notice this woman going down the street in a wheelchair without an umbrella, but this guy did and shared his umbrella with her, which is very beautiful. So if we're really mindful, aware, and attentive, there's lots of opportunities around us all the time where we can, practice our kindness, our love, our concern for others, and put into practice what we are working on in our meditation. Okay, right mindfulness. So this is being aware of what we are doing each moment. So actually the term mindfulness is a little tricky because it can mean different things. But we don't have time to go into that now. But anyway, the usual understanding of mindfulness is paying attention to what's going on here and now in the present moment. Be aware of our body, what our body's doing, be aware of our thoughts, what our mind is doing, be aware of our speech, and so on. And one classic explanation of mindfulness is with regard to 4 objects: body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. So there's a very important sutra, the Satipatthana Sutra, taught by the Buddha, where he explained the practice of mindfulness with regard to these 4 things: being mindful of our body, what our body is doing. It starts with the breath. Actually, meditation on the breath is the first of the practices related to the body, being mindful of our breath, which is part of our body. And feelings, mindful of our feelings. Feelings here in Buddhism, it isn't like emotions, but it's more kind of first level of feelings that we experience with regard to objects that we meet. So it said there are 3 types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So in every moment, in every experience, we have one of those 3. We either have a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling or a neutral feeling. And it's very important to be aware of our feelings, because feelings can give rise, if we're not careful, they can give rise to disturbing emotions. For example, if we have an unpleasant feeling, it can lead to anger, hatred, aversion, and then our mind can get completely caught up in that. If we have a pleasant feeling, it can easily give rise to attachment, desire, craving, clinging. The mind can get stuck in that. So feelings themselves are not good or bad, but it's what can happen after the feelings. Our mind can get caught up in these disturbing emotions, which then lead to more suffering, more problems. So it's good to be mindful of our feelings and try not to allow that to happen. And then the mind itself, all the different types of states of mind that arise, being aware of those, mindful of those. And the phenomena. This means everything that doesn't fit into the first 3. So everything else, all other phenomena. So one develops gradually one's mindfulness with regard to all these different objects. And the real point of mindfulness, which isn't always explained in the modern contemporary context, the real point of mindfulness is to pay attention to what's happening in each moment and look out for disturbing attitudes, anger, hatred, greed, and so forth. Try to look out for those and steer the mind away from those. Okay, so mindfulness is really about that. It's paying attention to what's happening in the moment so that we try our best not to get caught up in things that are going to just create more suffering, and instead try to focus on things that are going to create more peace and happiness. So this is some people doing walking meditation. So this is one way of practicing mindfulness besides sitting, which is not easy to do all the time. Sometimes we get pain in our legs and back and so on. So it's nice to be able to practice mindfulness while moving, while walking. So the real practice of mindfulness ideally is to keep it going all the time in everything that we do, not just formal sitting meditation, but try to have it there all the time, all day. And then the last one, right? Meditation or concentration. So this is what I explained before, that the need to develop the ability to keep our mind focused in meditation, not wandering here and there, going all over the place. And in the Tibetan tradition, they say there are two main kinds of meditation. One is called placement meditation, or shamatha is the Sanskrit term. So this is meditation for developing concentration, training the mind to stay focused on just one object for longer and longer periods of time. Another kind of meditation is called analytical meditation, and that is related to vipassana, which is for the development of insight or wisdom. So that's the kind of meditation for developing wisdom. So we don't have time to go into the explanation of this here, but anyway, it's enough to know that meditation is a very important part of traditional Buddhist practice, part of the path to liberation or nirvana. So those are the 8. We just went through them very, very quickly, but I wanted to go back to the 3 trainings and show how the 3 trainings include the Eightfold Path. So the first training is ethics, and under ethics we have right speech, right action, right livelihood. So those 3 have to do with our behavior, our actions, what we do in our life. And I think realistically, probably for most people, this is a good place to start. If you have the wish to follow the Buddhist path and work towards these higher goals of nirvana, liberation, enlightenment, this is a good place to start. Try to be more aware of your speech and your actions, your livelihood, and if there are things you're doing that are harmful or unwise, unskillful, find ways of reducing those and try to find ways of behaving that are more helpful, more skillful. It could be a process. It could be something that takes time, something to work on for months, years, your whole life. But it's worth doing because you feel a lot better. For one thing, you feel better about yourself if you're living ethically. You'll probably also have fewer problems with the people in your life. And yeah, and create less suffering. And then it's also essential for the attainment of these higher states. We just can't expect to attain nirvana or enlightenment if we can't behave ourselves ethically. And then the second of the 3 trainings is concentration. So under that, we have right effort, right mindfulness, right meditation, and concentration. So that's, we can start working on that as well. We can start trying to be more mindful, trying to meditate as much as we can. And then right wisdom. The 3rd training is wisdom. So under that is right understanding and right thought. So we can work on that as well by learning more, gaining more understanding, and also trying to work on our thoughts, have more positive ones. So it's possible to be working on all of the 8 at the same time, but if not, if you find it's a bit too much, then you can just start with 1 and work on that, and then gradually over time work on more. But ultimately, if one does wish to attain the highest goals, like nirvana enlightenment, then one does need to develop all 8. So, are there any questions? There's a lot of material. Yeah.
My question about the divisive speech. You say someone is in a relationship and they are treated bad, then and you want to, and if you tell the person that you think the other person is bad for them, then you are splitting from each other. But
Yeah.
but if you don't do anything, you just see the person suffer.
Yeah, that's a good question. But I think your motivation there is to help and not to harm, right? You don't want to cause suffering. You want to save somebody from suffering. But maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a way of doing it where you don't actually have to say, oh, that person is really horrible, is really bad. Because anyway, that probably wouldn't work if the person is in love with them. But maybe you could find some other way of saying it, like, how are things going in the relationship? Are you happy? Is he treating you well? And just kind of draw it out from the person and help them to see for themselves that, you know, the situation, this relationship is not so satisfying and healthy and so on.
Love makes you blind sometimes.
Yeah. But do you see what I'm saying? I'm saying you don't actually have to say he's bad, but or she's bad or
In
whatever.
some situations, it could be other situations. I have kids, and they could be doing a lot of things, and things you will think that would be bad for them, and you
Yeah.
say, "Oh, that's not a good person to follow," or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say that's divisive speech. That's no. I don't think that qualifies as divisive speech. Well, I'm sure Buddhist parents would say this would also do that with their kids if they see their kids going off with drug sellers, or
Exactly.
gangs.
Exactly.
They
And
would
if you say, "Oh, that's a bad person for you,"
yeah,
then yeah,
yeah. It's a good question, but I think we just have to use our common sense. Yeah, and if you're a parent or a friend of somebody and you see that that person is in a relationship which is really harmful for them and causing them suffering, then I think you do, out of compassion, you need to step in and do what you can. It may not work, but to at least try, because your motivation is a loving one, a caring one. Yeah. So.
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of gray areas in all this stuff.
Yeah.
But I would say the other thing is when you were talking about the alcohol thing, I was thinking of like in a French, son, who has like they make champagne or something. Because that's considered in some way to be a very nice life. I mean, good wines and nice wine shops. I mean, that's so. I don't know what. To me, that's not. It wouldn't be bad to be involved in producing nice wines, especially ecological wines. And the other thing is a little bit in that area is in the States now. And I think also in Denmark, there's this idea that if for people who are eating meat, that it's much better. Like for instance, the cows, at least while they're alive, they should be able to graze outside in the sunshine and not be in these little forced enclosures. So someone who is trying to improve their condition, they're not going to change that fact that in the end they're going to be slaughtered, but they can at least have a decent life while they're alive. And so there's these gray areas that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these kind of points are really just a framework, but it isn't, they shouldn't be seen as black and white, you know, but just as a guideline to go by.
I know some farmers really do care for their animals. Well,
Yeah.
you know, they have a very close relationship with their.
Yeah. And also they say motivation is a really important aspect. You know, a person might even do an act of killing with a good motivation if there's no other way out of a situation. So it's said that the most important aspect of an act is your motivation rather than the act itself. So we try as much as we can to have a good motivation, a compassionate one, wanting to help, wanting to avoid harming. But yeah, the world we live in is so complex, so complicated, and people are so complicated as well that it's, you know, it's hard to be perfect. It's hard to do things right. So we just try the best that we can, try to develop compassion and wisdom and put those into practice and just do the best that we can. That's all we can do. And also work gradually. We know, like I said, you may not be able to do all of these at once, but you work on what you can. And then gradually over time, you might see, well, I can also work on this. I can also change that. Does that make sense? No. And the thing about, I was going to say something about alcohol. Oh, yeah. I think I have the feeling that in Asia in general, alcohol is seen as, you know, taking alcohol, drinking alcohol is really kind of a bad thing. It's quite different, and especially in Europe, you know, where even, you know, children, you know, in family dinners, they drink wine. It's
France, you know, they actually have a little red wine there. It's really healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a big tradition in France and all. But what about like in Japanese with the sake, the warm sake and stuff?
Yeah. Again, it's a question of degree.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's. I mean,
If you know, like there's a precept of one of the 5 precepts is to not take intoxicants, and some teachers, when they give it, they give that in a very strict way. You know, not even a drop of alcohol, not even a puff of marijuana. But others say, well, you know, it's okay to drink a little bit as long as you don't get drunk. It's okay to smoke a little bit as long as you don't get stoned. So the important thing is to not go overboard, because that's the problem. You know, if you take too much, you lose control of your mind. And if you're concerned about developing your mind, it just doesn't make sense to, you know, let your mind get out of control like that. So, but that does happen to a lot of people. You know, a lot of people don't know how to stop.
Yeah, that's horrible.
So
they tried prohibition too, and prohibition doesn't really work. Gangs and underground activities.
Yeah, so it's more personal choice and working on oneself. Yeah, it's complicated because you also have Buddhist teachers who sometimes drink.
Colorado.
And Japan as well. Some of the Japanese Zen masters, they like their sake. So it's controversial. Okay, any others? We got 1 minute left. We didn't have time for meditation. Do you think some of these things are useful? Some of these ideas? And I mean, it's helpful, like even if we think, well, I can't do all of these things, but yeah, some of them could be useful. Some of them could be helpful. This one Buddhist teacher. She's passed away now, but she was quite a well-known teacher and author of a number of books. She's originally from Germany. Her name was Aya Kema, and she has a really interesting life. She wrote a story about her life, amazing life. Um, grew up in Germany under the Nazis. She was Jewish, so her family had to escape. And anyway, she just ended up going all over the world and having all these adventures. And eventually, she became a Buddhist nun. But she said that in the beginning, she was actually, because of her Jewish background, she wanted to look into Jewish mysticism, but then she found out it wasn't for women; it was only for men. So that was discouraging. Then she got into Buddhism, and she said that for her, it was really helpful to start with the point about ethics. It was something practical, something that she could start working on, just working on her actions of body and speech, and then working on the mind as well. So she said that was particularly helpful for her. And then she became quite an accomplished meditator and meditation teacher, and seemed to have quite a high level of concentration. Well, okay. So next week I will explain another way of talking about the path, which is more in the Tibetan tradition. This is more the Theravada tradition in Southeast Asia, Thailand, and Burma, and so on. So this is the main way of talking about the path that they go by. In the Tibetan tradition, we have a somewhat different way, not completely different, but some different points. So we'll start looking at that. Okay, so let's stop here for tonight and just take a few minutes to mentally dedicate the positive energy that we created tonight. We came together, we did some meditation, we looked at some of these teachings of the Buddha on the path that leads out of suffering to peace, to happiness, to liberation. We tried to do this with a good motivation, with wishing to benefit ourselves and others in the world. So it's good to feel a sense of joy or rejoicing when we do engage in positive things like this, and feel confident that we have created some positive energy, what we call merit in Buddhism. And there's the tradition of sharing the merit, dedicating the merit to others, that it will bring benefit, peace, happiness, and eventually liberation and enlightenment to all living beings. May it relieve their suffering and bring them all peace and happiness. Okay, thank you. Good night.